Hello, everybody. This is part two for the botany class for the Master Naturalist program, and this lecture will focus on the anatomy and morphology of vegetative parts. So that means leaves, stems, and roots. I'll also spend a little bit of time discussing tissue types, which are a lot different than you might find in animals, and we'll conclude with uh, understanding different plant forms, so the difference between, say, a forb, a shrub, and a tree. So we talked a little bit about cells last time, but just to review, like all other organisms, they're composed of cells. Plants are eukaryotic organisms, so they have cells with complex subcellular structures that are unlike bacteria. They have a cell wall, and that cell wall is made of primarily cellulose, hemicellulose, and lignin. And lignin is the compound that makes woody plants rigid, that provides the strength of and very decay resistant uh, uh, compounds. And then sorry, the cell wall of plants is different than the cell wall of fungi. It's composed of a different compound, and then other algae can have cell walls of different compounds too. But what makes plant cells distinct is the fact that their cell wall is primarily made of cellulose. They also have nuclei, like all eukaryotic cells do. The nuclei contains DNA. The DNA codes for proteins and enzymes, and proteins and enzymes do a lot of the important biochemical processes within cells and all life for that matter. There are structures like the endoplasmic reticulum and the Golgi bodies that move those proteins around the cell and modify the proteins. Vacuoles contain secondary metabolites, sometimes waste products. The chloroplasts are where photosynthesis occurs, and the mitochondria are where the sugars are broken down in the process of respiration. Cells are organized into tissues. In plants, we tend to call these tissue systems. And unlike the many tissue types you could find in animals, plants just have three main types of tissue systems: ground tissue, dermal tissue, and vascular tissue. Vascular tissue consists of three kinds of cells. Dermal tissue is primarily, which we'll talk about in a second. Dermal cells are the epidermis, the outer layer of a plant's body, and then the different other uh, uh, groups of cell types like guard cells and hair cells that can occur on the epidermis. And the vascular system is the aforementioned xylem that transports water, phloem that transports food, and the vascular camion that makes up both xylem and phloem. So within the ground tissue system, there are three cell types: parenchyma cells, which make up the majority of the plant's body. So most of what is a plant are different kinds of parenchyma cells. They're soft and squishy, often photosynthetic, but have very diverse functions depending on where they are in different kinds of organs. Parenchyma cells are modified cells that have extra reinforcement with um, uh, really long fibers that provide strength but flexible support. Where you can recognize, or if you want to see a good example of parenchyma cells, would be in celery. So if you were to slice open, this is a very small piece of celery, but it's celery cells in the peaks of the ridges on the outside of a stalk of celery, which is actually the petiole or base of a leaf. There'll be a concentration of these parenchyma cells, and if you're careful, you can actually pull out individual extremely long cells. But that is what provides the flexible rigidity in, or sorry, the flexible strength in petioles. Another example, if you just see a herbaceous plant and the uh, leaf is held out kind of horizontally, perpendicular to the stem. The fact that it is held out like this, but still flexible, is a consequence of having a lot of collenchyma cells at the base of the petiole. And then there are sclerenchyma cells that provide rigid support. They can be fibers, so very rigid fibers, like in the case of hemp or jute or flax, and then little concentrations of heavily lignified cells are called sclerids, and that's what provides the rigid uh, structure of like seeds or pits or those sorts of things, seed coats, etc. The dermal tissue system forms the outer protective tissue of the plant body. So, as the name implies, it's kind of like our skin, but it's the layers of cells on the exterior of the body. And they often are very tightly packed together. Like this is from a leaf, and you see they kind of fit together like puzzle pieces. They're often covered in thick layers of a thick cuticle, which is a layer of wax that helps retain moisture. And then the dermal tissue system also consists of guard cells that open and close stomata and trichomes or hairs that can have various functions, including releasing anti-herbivory compounds. Um, they can form nectary systems in some cases. They can, extrafloral nectaries at least. They can provide some uh, um, retention of water vapor close to the surface to increase humidity, things like that. In some cases, hairs can reflect light too, like in some desert plants. And then the vascular tissue system consists of xylem and phloem cells, like I mentioned. These are cross sections of individual um, SEMs of xylem cells. They can be very wide and stack like pipes in the case of uh, uh, vessel elements, or they can be really thin and winding and wrapped up in each other, like in the case of tracheids. So ferns and conifers just have this kind of xylem cell, and then flowering plants, the angiosperms, have both this kind and this kind. And then phloem cells, back up, sorry. Xylem cells are dead at maturity, actually, so they are just hollow leftover pieces of cell wall when they're mature. Um, Whereas phloem cells are alive at maturity. They are those cells that transport food that made in photosynthesis, and it goes from where it's made to where it's needed, or from where it's stored to where it's needed. They often have companion cells that help support the actual sugar transporting cells because they are so specialized for doing so. Um, and while this process, the process of moving water, is a function of transpiration, requires no energetic input from the plant, the movement of sugars does require energetic input from the plant through a process called the pressure flow hypothesis, if you're curious how that works. Here's a cross section of a leaf, and this is a cross section of a stem and a root, just to indicate how these different tissue systems are distributed in different organs. So in this leaf cross section, the dermal system is depicted in black here, this black line on the outside of the leaf. The mesophyll, or the main body of the leaf, where a lot of photosynthesis takes place, consists of ground tissue, and the vascular tissue is depicted in the red and blue areas here. So red is xylem and blue is phloem. Here's a cross section of a typical dicot stem, like we mentioned before. You've got bundles of vessels inside this yellow-green ground tissue, epidermis on the outside, with phloem towards the perimeter and xylem towards the center. And then roots have a little different structure. They have an outer epidermal layer, and they have a second kind of epidermal layer called uh, the periderm. No, I'm calling that wrong. Anyway, this I'll think of that in a second. Here's the extra layer, and that kind of serves as a filter of sorts. So as water moves into the root, it helps regulate. It's a layer of cells that help regulate what goes into the vascular system. And notice in small roots, at least, the xylem is arranged in a cross, and the phloem cells in between the legs of the cross. Another concept to start off before we go into leaves, stems, and roots is in the above ground portions of plants. Any point along a stem where a leaf is connected is called a node. And as we'll see later with leaf arrangement, the number of leaves per node can causes the apparent arrangement of the leaves. And the distance between any point where leaves are connected, the distance between node is called the internode. So when a plant is growing in primary growth or growing in height, the space between the internodal space will increase as the individual cells expand. Other terms just to open up with are not are the fact that many plants have true stems and they are said to be caulescent, but some plants, like a dandelion, for example, or plantago, are considered acaulescent, and this just means that the internodal space between the leaves is so highly reduced that the stem is just this flattened, so-called basal rosette at the bottom of the plant. They still have flower stalks called inflorescences, but all the photosynthetic tissue is more or less at the base in this basal rosette. This growth pattern is selected to be resilient or less prone to being grazed by animals. If you imagine a grazing animal going down to the ground trying to feed, it won't as easily grab onto leaves that are prostrate and kind of prone close to the ground surface. Likewise, in a lawn situation where you're mowing constantly, you will select for more and more of the plants with this growth form. So that can be why many so-called weeds in a lawn have this growth form. Okay, first then we'll start going into each of the vegetative organs. We'll start with leaves. And as we learned in the last lecture, leaves are primarily responsible for photosynthesis and transpiration. So the leaf blade, which is the flat part of the leaf, absorbs solar radiation. It's also where the stomata are located to take in carbon dioxide. And when the stomata are open, water evaporates out, and that causes transpiration, the movement of water through a plant. The leaf blade is connected to the stem through the petiole. It's like a little mini stem for the leaf. And the petiole extends into the leaf blade as the midrib or the primary vein. And then if it has branching or reticulating or netted venation, then secondary veins branch off the primary vein, tertiary veins can branch off the secondary veins, etc. At the base of every true leaf is a bud. That bud can grow into a new stem with more leaves, and the base of each of those leaves are more buds, which can grow more stems and leaves. Or a bud can also be a reproductive bud. It can form a flower and then turn into a fruit, or it can be a reproductive branch that forms a cone or whatever. Usually floral buds are much wider and fatter and squatter than a vegetative bud. At the base of some leaves are structures called stipules, and this is an annoying term that just describes any paired appendage at the base of a leaf. So these stipules can be leaf-like, they can be hair-like, they can be spine-like, sharp and pointing, or they can be absent. But sometimes the presence or absence or the morphology of the stipules can be helpful for identification. Here's another depiction of anatomy belief, seeing much the same things. Here's the stem, here's the petiole connected to the leaf blade, but this has a few other features I want to highlight. The tip of the leaf is called the apex, and the base is called the base. That's a nice, refreshing change. And then the top of the leaf, typically, but really the side of the leaf that's closer to the stem, is called the adaxial surface, and the bottom of the leaf is often called the abaxial. So remember B for bottom. The edge is called the margin, and then some leaves have pulvini, a singular pulvinus, and this is just a swollen section that helps control the angle of the leaf. If a petiole is present, or if the equivalent of a petiole in a flower called a pedicel is present, we describe that as petiolate or pedicellate. But if you come across a description that of a leaf or flower as being sessile, sessile just means like directly attached or something like that. So in other words, the petiole or pedicel is so short that it looks like the leaf or flower is attached directly to the stem. Some leaves are sheathing, like in grasses, for example, so the leaf tissue wraps around the stem, and that's called a sheathing leaf. Looking at a cross section of a leaf. So here's the top of the leaf, here's the bottom of the leaf. There's some kind of interesting anatomical features. These are individual cells. You can see the epidermal cells on the adaxial surface and the epidermal cells on the abaxial surface. On the top of the leaf, we tend to see a higher concentration of so-called palisade parenchyma. Palisade, think of column. So these tightly packed column cells that are full of many, many chloroplasts. The idea is that as light is coming down, it can bounce around all of these concentrated cells and be absorbed as much as possible. And on the bottom of the side of the leaf, we tend to have a different kind of mesophyll called spongy mesophyll or spongy parenchyma. And that means there's just lots of gaps between the cells, and that allows for better gas exchange because the stomata, where the carbon dioxide enters, tend to be in higher concentrations on the bottom of the leaf. And that is usually because if it's on the surface of the leaf, or the top of the leaf, I mean, it's going to evaporate more. So you're going to get less solar radiation on the bottom of the leaf, less heat, a slower rate of water loss when the stomata are open. I should have said too, mesophyll is not here, but mesophyll means middle leaf. So basically, if the epidermis is the crust, the gooey stuff on the inside is the mesophyll, the middle leaf. So it can be called palisade mesophyll or palisade parenchyma or spongy parenchyma or spongy mesophyll. This is a zoomed out portion just to show some more of the leaf section. Notice there are more parenchyma cells at the bottom and the top of the leaf to provide support in the petiole. Here are the phloem and xylem cells for the mid vein. Um, Again, more stomata. Here's the epidermis. You can even sort of see some of the wax layer to contain moisture. This is a micrograph of an oleander leaf, which is adapted to arid environments, just to illustrate some of the adaptations plants in arid environments might have. They have a stomata in a so-called stomatal crypt. It's a sunken area or an invagination of the abaxial surface. And this is beneficial because this area where in theory, the water is evaporating out of is going to be slightly more humid than the surface of the leaf that's exposed to the outer environment. It's because this area is slightly more humid, then the rate of water loss will be slowed down somewhat when the stomata are open. Other adaptations, look, it's got an extra thick cuticle, very nice, waxy leaf, and then extra layers of tightly packed epidermal cells to further prevent water loss. All right, the leaf blade, though, can be subdivided into leaflets. So they look like individual leaves, but they're not. And I'll tell you why in a minute. But essentially, if the leaf blade is one individual unit, it's called a simple leaf. But if it's subdivided into smaller leaflets, then it's described as a compound leaf. How do you tell the difference? Why is this a leaf with leaflets versus not just a branch with simple leaves? Look for the axillary buds. A true leaf will have a bud at its base. The leaflets do not. They might have similar stipule-like structures called stipules. They have petiole-like structures called petioles. But this is still ultimately a modified simple leaf that has become so divided that it forms separate leaflets to form a compound leaf. So a compound leaf can be either pinnately compound or palmately compound. Pinnate, pinnac is the Latin word for feather. So the leaflets are arranged along an axis or a line in a pinnately compound leaf, and this sort of looks kind of feather-like. Whereas in a palmately compound leaf, the leaflets are arranged around a point, like the fingers around the palm of your hand. This is the most common type of leaf blade, followed by pinnately compound, and palmately compound leaves are not especially common. Here are some examples. This is American persimmon. Here is the branch, and you can see individual buds at the base of the leaves. Therefore, these are each simple leaves. Likewise, here is a small anthus, it's a type of aster. It actually has opposite leaves. We'll talk about that in a second. But these little stems here are actually growing from buds that have opened up, that are growing from what used to be buds. But um, because we see these, we know that this is in fact, a simple leaf. Examples of pinnately compound leaves include winged sumac or black walnut. And if you want to get real nerdy, you can actually distinguish between pinnately compound leaves if they have an odd number or even number of leaflets. And that in turn is a function of if they have a terminal center leaflet or not, right? So this is a type of sumac, and notice it's got the wing. The reason it's called winged is that there's some leaf tissue that kind of that extends between the leaflets, but ultimately there are no buds at the base of these leaflets. The main bud is down here, so this is a single leaf. Likewise, black walnut here. This is a single leaf with multiple leaflets and a bud at the very base that's lacking at the base of the leaflets. Pinnately compound leaves or any compound leaves can be compounded multiple times. So this is an example from black locust, a native legume tree, a fabulous landscape tree too, if you get the non-thorny cultivar. But look, the compounded leaves are themselves compounded. So this entire thing right here is a single leaf because it's only at the base that you find a bud. Not here and not here will you find a bud. So this is a single leaf. Another example is Nandina, bleh, but no accounting for taste. But Nandinas actually have quite large leaves. They can be bipinnately or tripinnately compound. So if you have an Nandina, see if you can find a single leaf, and you'll find it's actually quite large. Examples of palmately compound leaves include buckeyes. This is one of our native buckeyes, Aesculus pavia. Here is a single leaf. Here's a bud. Here's a bud. This is there's no buds at the base of these leaflets here. Notice too that the leaves are oppositely arranged. Stay tuned. And then this type of inflorescence is called a raceme. It's simply a relatively simple stalk of flowers. Or maybe it's a panicle. Well, raceme-ish, we'll call it. More on that in lecture 3. Here is Schefflera, this kind of common house plant, but another good example of a palmately compound leaf here. Some leaves are trifoliolate, so it's a compound leaf that just has 3 leaflets. And notice it is trifoliolate, not trifoliate, not trifoliate. Trifoliolate is the correct way to describe this compound leaf with 3 leaflets. The things like oxalis, I cannot remember the name of oxalis suddenly. Anyway, it's not clover. It's in a different family. But it's a common weed. There are some ornamental oxalis species. But also, of course, our friend poison ivy actually has trifoliolate leaves. So there's a bud at the base here, and there are 3 leaves making up 3 leaflets making up the compound leaf. The arrangement of leaves on a stem is called phyllotaxy, or just straight up leaf arrangement. And leaf arrangement is a function of the number of leaves per node. So if there is 1 leaf per node, the arrangement is said to be alternate, 2 leaves per node, opposite, more than 2 leaves per node, whorled. And the names are quite descriptive. So in the case of a stem with alternating leaves, they are kind of literally alternating up the stem, sometimes in a spiral fashion, sometimes in a ranked fashion where there's pairs of them on either side of the stem. Whereas in opposite leaves, there are 2 per node. So at any point along the stem, there is a pair of leaves. Commonly, these pairs of leaves are occurring at 90 degrees from each other. And that is to maximize the efficiency of light interception. If they were overlapping each other, that would be a waste of intercepting as much light as possible. And then whorled leaves are where there are more than 3 leaves per node. Alternate is the most common by far. Opposite is not uncommon, but can be helpful for identifying some plant families. So the dogwood family, mostly, not always, the ash family, ash and olive family, uh, the buckeye family, the mint family, all of those mostly have opposite leaves. So sometimes if you see opposite leaves, it might be an indicator to narrow down your options considerably. Likewise with whorl leaves, these are quite not very common. And I'll show you some examples of all of these now. So here's an example of an alternate leaf arrangement. This is American elm. Here is the stem, and you can see at any one point along the stem, there's only one leaf attached. And these are all simple leaves. If you look very carefully, you might find a bud at the base of these leaves. Opposite leaves include things like ash. This is green ash or white ash, forget the common name. But they also have compound leaves, just to make it more fun here. But if you look carefully, this is a single compound leaf, another single compound leaf, opposite each other on the stem. So at any one point, there's a pair of leaves. Here is chickweed. Again, you can really distinctly see the pair of leaves at 90 degrees from the pair of leaves below it. Another common one would be Lelanium species, henbit and purple dead nettle or dead nettle. Um, in the mint family, many plants in the mint family have these the decussate opposite arrangement. Whorl leaves, not very common, but a local one that does it is catalpa, big nonioides, also called catalpa. And here's a great example. There are 1, 2, 3 leaves arranged per node. A word of warning, though, with identification or looking at leaf arrangement, the leaf arrangement can be distorted towards the very tip of the stem or branch because it's before individual cells have fully expanded. So this distance between the leaves can be quite minimal. And so it can be hard to tell what the true arrangement is. So if it looks confusing, look a bit further down the stem so that the actual phylotactic pattern reveals itself. So the arrangement is more evident further down the stem. There are, pause for a moment. Uh, there will be lots of vocabulary in this lecture. Do not fret. Uh, Either in the live session or if you want to watch the part 4 from the old class on resources, I will mention a book that has a list of all of these godforsaken botanical terms. One of the challenges in biology is the sheer volume of vocabulary. So don't worry about memorizing these. Just know how to reference them and consider this as a kind of survey of the variation that you could potentially see. And to start developing an eye for some of this variation of different plant parts. So leaves can have different shapes, and there are terms that we use to describe consistent shapes. And a lot of these descriptors are pretty obvious. This is just a small smattering. There are many more than this. But some of the basic ones include elliptic, which is shaped like an ellipse or an oval. Lanceolate means spear-shaped. Ovate means more egg-shaped. And then if you see the prefix ov, that is Latin for reversed. So think upside down. So if it's an ovate leaf, it's an upside down egg. If it's an lanceolate leaf, it's an upside down spear tip. If it's an long leaf, it's an upside down long. No, not really. That's just confusing. Compare an oblong leaf to an elliptical leaf, and you'll notice that the curve of the oblong leaf straightens out and then curves again. Oops. Whereas in a elliptical leaf, the curve is continuous. Notice in a lanceolate and ovate leaf, we're contrasting these based on where it is widest. So in case of an ovate leaf, it's widest at the base and narrows. When that's upside down, it's widest at the tip and then narrows at the base. Elliptical leaf tends to be widest at the middle. And again, with oblong leaves, the sides are more parallel. And there are some other specialized terms, like a deltate leaf is shaped like a triangle. I don't show it here, but a cordate leaf is kind of heart-shaped, like imagine a redbud leaf is a cordate leaf. Some, like with junipers, you have really specialized leaves that are scale-like and very tiny. Go look at a juniper or a arborvitae or Leyland cypress or something, you'll see that. And then pines have needle-like leaves, but they're still just modified narrow leaves. In the case of pines, they are actually bundled into something called a fascicle, and this is actually a miniaturized kind of branching system that's kind of specialized. But when pines drop their leaves, and they do slowly over time, they drop as this bundle. And in some cases, the number of needles per bundle can help with some identification of some pines, but that varies a bit by region. Here's some ex real examples of some different leaf shapes. So this is a pawpaw, and you can call this an obovate leaf, but often in leaf descriptors, you will see multiple descriptions. So a leaf might be described as obovate to oblanceolate or elliptical dash lanceolate. So, and that represents how variable leaves can be on an individual, within an individual and among individuals in a population. So leaf shape can get messy, is my point. Here's an example of cottonwood. Is that cottonwood? Yes. Of a deltate leaf, so it's kind of triangularly, more or less triangularly shaped. It's got a more of a flat base rather than a heart-shaped base that you would find on a cordate leaf. Oh, but wait, there's more. There are all sorts of godforsaken terms to describe the tips of leaves, called the leaf apices. Some of them are very simple, like geometry, acute versus obtuse, less or more than 90 degrees. But if they have a little notch or point, it can be acuminate or sometimes a mucrinate. They can have little indentations. If they're tiny, they're obtuse. If it's more of a nice, voluptuous badonkadonk, it's said to be a marginate. If they're flat, truncate, they can be rounded. Oh, sorry, mucrinate is where there's a little like pin sticking out. And then attenuate is where there's a gradual concave curve, like you might, I don't know, see on a lot of tropical plants or plants in wet environments. Likewise, there are lots of ways to describe leaf bases. Similarly, acute, obtuse, rounded, truncate. Cordate can also be a leaf base shape, but imagine the whole leaf looking kind of heart shaped. Decurrent is like attenuate, but for the base. Cuneate, it means wedge. Think of cuneiform and wedge writing. Sagittate means kind of like arrowhead shape, lobate, kind of ear shaped, or auriculate is ear shaped. But wait, there's more. There are even ways to describe the leaf edges, which we call leaf margins. And do we call a leaf with smooth edges smooth? No, no, no. That would be too easy. Instead, it's a leaf with a smooth edge is said to be entire. And then leaves, though, don't have to have smooth edges. They can have teeth-like structures. And we have different ways to describe the teeth-like structures. If the teeth are pointing towards the tip, said to be serrate. If the teeth are pointing out away from the leaf, it's said to be dentate. You can describe a diminution. So if it's got little shark teeth, it's said to be tenticulate, or little serrations, it could perhaps be cerulate. Um, then sometimes you can have crenations or like half circles, uh, semicircles on the edge of the leaf. Leaves can be wavy in different directions. So if it's undulate, it's wavy in the same plane as the leaf. If it's sinuate, it's wavy in the direction perpendicular to the leaf. So wavy in this direction, etc., etc. Teeth can also be doubly toothed. So here is a leaf of river birch. You can see that the individual serrations themselves have serrations. And here's an example of a dogwood leaf with a very smooth or not smooth, entire margin. And instead of teeth, you might have lobes. These are more dramatic indentations of the leaves. So wherever part of the leaf sticks out, it's called a lobe, and the space in between is a sinus, versus an unlobed leaf that doesn't have those big indentations. And yes, botanists even have some delightfully esoteric ways to describe how lobed they are. If you want to impress someone at a cocktail party, you can show them this. But depending on how far it goes to the inside of the leaf, it can be described as lobed, cleft, parted, or divided. So if you think, for example, the parted leaves of a red maple versus the divided leaves of this cultivar of Japanese maple. And you can imagine when a leaf blade becomes utterly divided so where that the individual lobes become separated from each other, suddenly you have then a compound leaf. Also, look at the vein arrangement. A simple way to describe them would be, are they pinnately netted? So are they netted along an axis like this? So here's a main vein and here's a single main vein with secondary veins along that main vein, or are there multiple uh, main veins with secondary veins, palmately netted? And then in the case of monocots, they can be parallel veined. So again, imagine a grass leaf um, that you can see prominent veins in parallel to each other and to the length of the leaf blade itself. And these are terms I don't even have memorized, but just to show you some variation here, sometimes the veins go all the way to the edge, sometimes they don't, sometimes they curve back on each other, sometimes they branch before the edge. So there's all these different ways to describe different vein patterns in both pinnately and palmately veined leaves, but don't worry too much about that. But just to kind of illustrate that, here's they are leaves of an apparently chlorotic uh, beech, but you can see how here's the mid vein, here are the secondary veins. They're kind of V-shaped, and they go almost all the way to the edge. Contrast that to dogwood leaf veins, and this is kind of diagnostic for dogwood in the forest for a field character. You can see that the secondary veins curve back towards the center. So if you see that and the margin is smooth and the leaves are opposite each other, it's almost certainly a dogwood. But wait, there's more. There are all sorts of kinds of hairs on leaves, and we call that generally, if a leaf has hairs, it's said to be, or any part of a plant has hairs, is called pubescent. And if it's lacking hairs, it's said to be glabrous. Uh, and those can be the patterns can be various among the hairs in all these different ways. They can be short, they can be pube-like, they can be kind of woolly, they can be rigid, they can be all moving in one direction. All these different ways that can describe the finer ways that hairs can be arranged. But a good example of this, where it's helpful for identification, can be distinguishing to help you distinguish among some of the different hickory species. For example, there is mockernut hickory, a native hickory, Carya tomentosa, and it has tomentose hairs, kind of woolly hairs on the bottom of the leaf and on the veins here. Contrast that to glabrous leaves, which means, again, glabrous means hairless, of pignut hickory, Carya glabra. And that, if you feel the petiole, if you feel the leaves, it doesn't feel like it has many hairs. So kind of a cool difference there. And then individual hairs can have different shapes if you're curious. Kind of elaborate, larger hairs are called trichomes. Good examples of trichomes would be glandular trichomes. These are hairs that have little sacs of oily, juicy stuff on the tip. So whenever you crush a mint plant or a rosemary or oregano, you're rupturing the gland at the tips of the hairs that releases that compound. And to us, it tastes and smells delicious. To insects, not so much. But sometimes, again, these can be helpful for identification. So here are the glandular hairs of sage. And then here are the stellate or star-shaped hairs on Quercus stellata. This is post oak, but the Latin form means it's a oak with star-shaped hairs. If you look on the bottom of the leaf, with some magnification. You can easily recognize these. Okay, plants can also have sharp and pointy things. Sometimes those sharp and pointy things can be derived from modified leaves, in which case they're called spines. Other times, the sharp and pointy things are derived from stems, in which case they're technically called thorns. And in some cases, the sharp and pointy things are extensions of the epidermis, in which case they're called prickles. So if it's located where a leaf should be, it's probably a spine. If it's located where a stem would be growing, it's called a thorn. So those tend to have more regular arrangement. Also, spines and thorns tend to be quite rigid. Contrast that to prickles, which occur more randomly along a stem, and you can see you can tell they're sort of protruding from the epidermis. And they also tend to be, you can break them off more easily. So if you see them randomly arranged, easy to break off, it's probably a prickle. Therefore, every rose has its prickles, not a thorn, if you want to be technical. Uh, these are prickles from blackberry. And then leaves can also be modified in other funky things. So if you have a leaf at the bottom of a flower, it's called a bract. The Really all parts of the flower are modified leaves evolutionarily. And we'll learn in the next lecture, the outer part of the flower that forms the bud. When the flower is open, it's often these green leafy tissue at the bottom of it are called individually sepals, but it makes up the calyx. Bud scales are usually modified, or are technically modified leaves I mentioned. If they're hard, that's part of the calyx. It can be in some, if it's well, that's not a, no. Bud scales on usually vegetative buds. And then some leaves can be modified into traps, like Venus flytrap or the pitcher traps of pitcher plants. Some can be modified into tendrils, but stems can also do that. And then some can be modified for storage. So when you cut open an onion, the bulb is a set of modified leaves that are adapted for storing starches. And the actual stem is way down here, and the leaves emerge up from the ground as the scallions, basically, of the onion. All right, stems are meant for providing structure for the plant. It's a place where the leaves can be mounted and it grows upward in theory towards the sun. So they support the leaves, they support the flowers, they support the fruit. And then it is one of the ways where we can there's a lot of vessels, a lot of vasculature as I'm going to flow them to transport food and water. We addressed this some in the last lecture, but to review, xylem cells transport water. It's more or less one way through transpiration. No energetic input from the plants. Water moves from soil to roots, up the stem, out the leaves, into the atmosphere. Whereas phloem cells move food from a source to a sink. So where it's made, like in the case of leaves, to where or to where it's stored, like in the case of roots or some other storage organ, to where it's needed, the sink. So if during the growing season, if roots are growing in the soil, then they cannot photosynthesize. They're relying on the phloem to transport the starches made in photosynthesis from the leaves to the roots. But if a plant is growing, a deciduous plant is uh, uh, transitioning from winter to spring, it's coming out of dormancy. There's a lot of stored energy in the roots that are going to be moved in the phloem towards the developing buds, so providing food for the buds and the developing leaves until the leaves can start undergoing photosynthesis themselves and return to being a source rather than a sink. So again, I mentioned before, though, just to review that inside stems, if dicots at least, uh, the vessels are arranged in bundles, and those bundles are arranged in rings. And because they're arranged in the rings, and because the vascular cambium produces phloem in this direction and xylem in this direction, the girth of the stem starts to increase. So eventually these bundles merge into rings, and you get more and more accumulation of xylem tissue, and older phloem tissue is eventually ruptured and shed. But in plants that undergo this secondary growth, this growth in girth, and if they're woody, they often have additional layers of tissue that form called the periderm. And the periderm produces something called cork tissue that comes from the cork cambium. And it's the combination of the periderm and shed phloem, older phloem, that comprises bark. And as you might imagine, bark is important for protecting this very thin layer of phloem tissue and the very thin layer of vascular cambium that makes xylem and phloem. Because if this were to become injured or girdled completely, the plant would die because there's no way for it to move phloem or move food up and down, and there's no way for it to produce more xylem or phloem cells to keep growing. But in many woody plants, or in all woody plants, there are ruptures in the bark layer, very tiny ruptures called lenticels, that allow for better gas exchange between the living phloem and vascular cambium cells beneath the bark. This is most prominently seen in cherry trees, perhaps. If you see a relatively young cherry tree in the landscape, you'll see smooth bark, but a lot of these horizontal eruptions, those are the lenticels. Those are not infections or anything. That's just where the bark it opens up to allow oxygen to get to the living tissue beneath. Stems can also be modified into different organs. Sometimes they can be modified for storing starches. So one version is a modified underground stem called a tuber in the case of white potatoes or Irish potatoes. But kohlrabi can have a swollen base. That's for energy storage. Likewise, the corms, which are just this swollen base with a papery outer layer, like in gladiolus, is a form of a storage tissue that's a modified stem. Stems don't have to grow vertically though. They can grow horizontally too. If they're horizontally growing stems and they're underground, they're called rhizomes. If they're horizontally grown stems and they're above ground, they're called stolons or runners. And this allows a plant to expand its area without having to reproduce. It's a vegetative growth. In theory, and then from these horizontal stems, new vertical stems can grow. And as a gardener, you can separate them, and suddenly you have two physiological individuals that are genetically identical or clones of themselves. But like leaves, stems can also be modified into tendrils. So while the tendril of a pea plant is a modified leaf, the tendril of grapes are modified stems. Finally, with roots, these are structures that anchor the plant into the ground and more critically, allow plants to absorb water and the nutrients from the soil matrix. The tips of roots are highly specialized for water and nutrient absorption. They have several features that allows them to absorb more water. So these root hairs are extensions of individual cells that collectively greatly increase the surface area of the root. The tips of roots can have a root cap. It's an area of rapidly dividing and shedding shells. Shedding shells by the seashore. No, I mean shedding cells that, again, allow the root tip to penetrate the soil matrix better. They can also have, uh, they can also release mucilage that, again, can sort of kind of lubricate the root tip to the soil. But as roots mature, they grow in girth just like stems do. And as they mature and grow further from the plant, as they mature and they're closer to the plant, they get wider in girth, and they tend to lose their ability to absorb nutrients sufficiently. So the wider the roots are, the closer they are to the base, they tend to function more for water absorption, whereas the root tips are more specialized for nutrient and water absorption. Uh, Also, tree roots or roots of woody plants tend not to be super deep. It's a misunderstanding to assume that the root mass is a mirror to the above ground part of the plants. Instead, roots are often a lot more shallow than you realize. Like the top, I don't know, maybe like 80, 90% of the root mass is probably in the top 2 feet or so of the soil. There are exceptions. Some of them have really deep anchored tap roots, but most plants have relatively shallow superficial roots that go much farther beyond the drip line potentially. So a takeaway would be if you are, say, fertilizing a fruit tree or something, you typically don't need to fertilize uh, other trees in the landscape, especially in clay soils as much. But if you do fertilize trees, then it makes sense to fertilize them towards the tips of the root mass, so like the drip line and beyond, because if you were to sprinkle fertilizer around the base of the tree, there's not going to be many roots to absorb those nutrients, and other plants or weeds or bacteria or fungi will take advantage of that instead, or it will just run off. Roots can also be modified into different structures. There are some that are specialized, like in the case of white mangroves and red mangroves, into pneumatophores. So they grow in inundated conditions, so they're constantly flooded with water. The roots will poke out of the water to get oxygen, because roots need oxygen too. Epiphytic orchids have modified aerial roots that can absorb water from the atmosphere. And then things like sweet potato have modified storage roots. So these are not tubers like you would see in a white potato. Instead, these are swollen roots that are for storing starches. Finally, uh, so we've done the main vegetative parts, but I thought it would be also good to cover real quick the uh, plant duration or growth habits that you might come across. Uh, so yeah, duration and growth habits rather. So annual plants mean that they complete their life cycle within a given year. And in temperate environments, that usually means they are either cool season or warm season. This means that if they're warm season, they typically grow from the last frost to the first frost. They die before it gets cold again. So they grow, produce flowers, produce fruits, release their fruits and seeds, and then die. And then the seeds germinate the following season. In the case of cool season annuals, they will tend to start growing in the fall or the early spring or late winter, early spring, and die off by the time it gets warm again in late spring, early summer. Biennial plants are plants that have a 2-year life cycle, where in the first year they're primarily producing leaves, vegetative growth, roots, for photosynthesizing and storing a lot of energy so that in the following year, they can use some of that stored energy to make the very energetically expensive flowers and fruits and seeds. In the southeast, there can be some plants that are maybe biennial further north, but because it's warm for so long, might just behave as annuals, like in a lot of thistles, for example. And then perennial herbaceous plants, well, sorry, let me back up. Perennial plants are plants that live multiple years. And let's see. Oh, I gave some more examples here. Sorry. So cool season would be uh, um, an example of a cool season annual would be like Blewit or Houstonia. Example of a warm season annual would be Biden's Aristosa. And then perennial plants can be either herbaceous or woody, and more on that in a moment. In a herbaceous perennial, the above ground portions of the plant last a year, and the below ground portions of the plant, the crown and the roots, live for many years. So what happens is during the warm season, they will um, come out of dormancy and grow new stems and leaves and flowers and fruits. And then by the end of the year, that above ground portion will die. And then the roots can still grow if it's warm enough in the winter. And then the following year, that bigger root mass will produce more above ground parts. And with woody plants, instead of the above ground portion dying back during cold seasons in temperate environments, they have a permanent above ground structure that can persist for many years. Oh, well, okay. Look, I have slides for this. Sorry. So when it is a herbaceous perennial, another word for it is a forb, not a shrub, but a forb. Often in ecological literature, you'll see a forb. So a forb can be anything that lacks a persistent above ground stem. So in other words, it's not a tree or a shrub. So forbs can be annuals, biennials, or perennials. Like here's this Carolina geranium. Here's Baptisia, fabulous native plant that pollinators love. And then another type of growth habit that can be non-woody or woody are vines. And a vine can be either a herbaceous vine that dies back during the cold season, or if it persists and is woody, it is more technically described usually as a liana. So like a grapevine or a poison ivy vine or gelsemium, those sorts of things, can produce woody above ground portions that persist for many years. The advantage of vines is they don't put as much effort in trying to be overly erect and rigid and up. They can devote more energy to growing longer when they grow on other objects. So that's why they can be particularly fast spreading. This is a native relative of cucumber. These are edible, but don't eat too many, or there will be consequences, gastroenterological consequences. Kind of a common weedy plant too. It's kind of cute. And then again, here's a species of native grape that I mean, if you see this kind of winding pattern doesn't have lots of hairs on it, it's probably grape and not poison ivy. And then shrubs and trees are woody plants. So if it has multiple woody stems that diverge usually below ground, or they look like separate trunks coming out of the soil, it's more commonly called a shrub. They tend to be relatively smaller. Trees more distinctively have a single woody trunk at the base, but sometimes you'll see multiple trunks. But usually, if they have multiple trunks, they diverge above the soil line. And there's a kind of a gray area here, right? Like there can be subshrubs or large shrubs, small trees. Like imagine a birch. Those are technically trees, but they have often multiple trunks. Um, and we don't usually in botanical or ecological literature call it a bush. Think of them as precedents maybe of varying quality, as rather than as a term for plants. Let's say shrub. It's more accurate than a bush. It's the this is a native. If you're curious, this is a native holly called Yopon holly. This is a rather big one. Great name too. Ilex vomitoria. And here's another native, at least to the coastal plain, um, Fothergilla, witch witch alder is the common name. Fabulous native shrub. If you've got relatively not super arid, kind of moist environments. Look at that fall color, gorgeous, and it has lots of white flowers that pollinators like. This is our native southern red oak, probably an underplanted oak that tolerates crappy soils better than northern red oak might, perhaps in a landscape at least. Oh, and here is a river birch that you can see those multiple trunks at the base, but they're technically diverging above ground, so we call it a big multi-trunk tree or a subshrub or something like that. All right, that's all I have for this lecture. Mercifully, just under an hour. So I will see you now on part 3.